Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Itchy Planet, a comic book published by Fantagraphics in 1988. This was an interesting idea for a comic. It was basically a political comic, political humor, almost like the editorial cartoons in a newspaper, but in comic form. All nonfiction, all talking about a certain topic. Each issue is a different theme. And it was edited by Leonard Rifas, who basically made his whole career of doing comics like this, using the comics medium to convey information, to advocate for certain things. Starting way back in the early 70s with Underground Comics. He did a bunch of Underground Comics. They're not the best Underground Comics. Leonard Rifas himself was a pretty terrible artist. But he would knew all the other underground cartoonists and would get them to contribute. So there's he did a lot of interesting comics over the years. So this is like 1988 now, so totally different era. And I guess Fantagraphics thought it would be a good idea and also kind of noble and a good thing to do. So it's a new crop of cartoonists. There's a few of the old underground cartoonists are in these, but it's a lot of newer 80s cartoonists. So here we have the first issue, The Crisis on Finite Earth. Basically, the theme of this issue is nuclear war. And we start off with this cover by David Suter. Kind of interesting. I'm not sure who David Suter is. Might be an editorial cartoonist. There's an instead of John Tenniel. Kind of really find this annoying that they did this. This comic would be so much more striking. Just the kind of abstract image here, or stripped down image. We have a contents page. And they did this every issue. I kind of like this. They had reviews for other like-minded comic books, other political comic books. And then they have this one as a special survey of AIDS comics. This is very interesting. They do this throughout their review sections where they'll, put the spotlight on a political comic that's really horrible politics. Like one of the pamphlets they review, it's a mini comic from 1986. It's an anti-homosexual, theologically hardcore look at AIDS. And, but they give you the information on it. So just very ecumenical. They're just like, okay, here's other political comics, even if we don't agree with them. Of course, then they have like this total homoerotic comic, which is basically trying to show that safe sex can still be sexy and fun. So we start off with Paradox by Larry Gonick, the creator of Cartoon History of the Universe. Man, love his cartooning. Just really great, simple, perfect cartooning. And this is about the whole paradox of nuclear weapons. They're weapons that you can never use, for example. And you can't really threaten someone with nuclear weapons because you can't use them or you'll die. If even just a few nuclear bombs would fuck up the world so much that even the country that sent the bombs, they'd be fucked up. So just talking about that whole weird idea of mutually assured destruction, how just at its core is completely inane and insane. But of course, Larry Gonick tries to put a comical spin on it, even though there's nothing really funny about it. Just really nice cartooning. Next, we have Nuclear Winter. And I forgot who this is by. Oh, this is by Leonard Rifas. So Leonard Rifas obviously just couldn't draw that well. But I do like in the 80s, he realizes this. And he's basically just using these almost like crude pictograms. And I gotta say, they look kind of good. This is like an interesting style he's got. It's not great, But his, 70s comics, he would actually just try to draw straight. And he wasn't very good. So I kind of like that he realized his limitations and said, oh, what if I come up with this simple, stripped down style? And I gotta say, he's pretty good at it. So he's talking about nuclear winter, obviously. And talking about, it's kind of sad, but just the whole political ramifications of it. How it's in the government's best interest to downplay the scientists who talk about this nuclear winter stuff. Because this is true mutually assured destruction. Once the idea of nuclear winter came around, any nuclear war was even more infeasible or unthinkable. Because the whole world would die. The crops couldn't grow anymore. The sun would be blocked out. So even if you were successful and you won the war, even if, let's say, America nuked Russia in 1988 to smithereens and not one of their missiles touched our soil, in a year, would be just as fucked as they were. Well, a little less fucked, but we'd probably all die of starvation. Look at this. I don't know. It kind of works though. I don't know. I'm just proud of the guy for making do with what he's got. He's still putting shit out there. He's giving it a good try. Here we have this prose piece by Jerry Gold of just what it's like working for the Pentagon doing war games. So I guess they'd have these elaborate war games to see how battle scenarios would turn out. Kind of a waste of a few pages. Little spot illustrations by Leonard Rifas. It was mildly interesting finding out about these war games, but overall, I wish this wasn't in here. Next, we have Norman Dog. I really miss Norman Dog. He was a good cartoonist, and then he just disappeared in the 80s. I'm sorry, this is written by Larry Gonick, I should say, and drawn by Norman Dog. So look out, it's the nuclear family. And this is pretty much played for laughs. It's about this family, and they all have nuclear capabilities, the daughter, the mother, the father. So there was like a normal household spat turns into a nuclear confrontation. Like, if you don't clean your room, I'm gonna nuke you. But the daughter's got a nuclear bomb, and she's all like, bring it on. I'll bomb your new Mercedes in the driveway. Really like this cartooning. Norman Dog, most of his stuff, if you remember him in the 80s, he did that kind of clip arty style, and which kind of like Tom Tomorrow kind of took over. But he did it way better, I think, Norman Dog. And this is like just not even clip arty. It's just this fun little style. In a weird way, it almost reminds me of like Tom Hart. Maybe just because they have no eyeballs and they're very simple and squat. He had a very 80s style. It just looked very 80s. That retro 80s thing going on. Harkening back to the 50s. So kind of a fun idea. And of course, at the end, they all blow each other up. Here's a little one-page prose thing about television. This is kind of that. I didn't care about it at all. And this is illustrations by Triangle Slash, that Pacific Northwest cartoonist. I think that's how you say their name, because their signature is just a glyph. Here's Michael Dougan doing Revival. And this is Michael Dougan remembering his first religious experiences as a child, going to like revival meetings. I guess his parents were hardcore Christians, and just desperately wanting to, be saved. Like, he really swallowed this Christian thing, hook, line, and sinker. And he was just really ecstatically into being a Christian. He's talking about in Sunday school how the teacher passed out these cards, and just a black square and a white square. She said the blood of Jesus could make our souls white as snow. It's interesting because I just read a Mr. A strip by Ditko, and this is like, wow, was his Sunday school teacher Mr. A? That could totally be like Mr. A's calling card. And this doesn't really have much to do with a nuclear war, even though they show a mushroom cloud here. A kind of badly drawn mushroom cloud. But he does kind of tie it in by saying just like how he was so happy to be born in America, where Christianity is cool. I like this drawing here. I think this is a recreation, but his mom would allow him to draw in church as long as his art had something to do with the sermon. So it's this crazy drawing of the lake of fire and the damned burning in hell, and then the saved flying up to Jesus. And the struggle continues. So I like how he uses a bunch of different styles in this. Even though I'm not a huge fan of Michael Dougan's art, but I do like his short stories. I think he's a better writer than he's an artist. U.S. comic books and nuclear war. And this is just a little article showing off how comic books have dealt with nuclear war over the years. And of course, not very intelligently. Kind of fun though, you know, if you're into comics history. Wow, so General Electric published millions of copies of comic books promoting nuclear power. There's one with Dagwood from Blondie. Dagwood splits the atom. And basically just shows how comic books, you know, we all know this from reading superhero comics as kids. It's almost like they had magical properties. Instead of killing you from radiation poisoning, you'd get superpowers. And, you know, just kind of ridiculous. And that's it for issue number 1. Issue number 2, nice cover from Norman Dog. Really like this. And this is the Comic Warp Our Vision, the comic book issue, talking about the comic book industry. We have a Leonard Rifas inside front cover. And the contents page. Some news and reviews of political comics. And a letters page here. And it's kind of interesting. 2 letter writers sent in comics. They said, hey, would you... just something for you guys to look at. Really like what you're doing. It's amazing, though. Look at these. These are, like, just as good or better than some of the comics in Itchy Planet. They should have just said, oh, here's $20 a page. Can we print these? I like this one in particular, Blind Eye the Sailor in the Persian Gulf. And this great parody of Popeye. Really well drawn. Really nicely cartooned. This is by Donnie Jupiter. This one's by Kjartan Arnarsson. And it's pretty good. Maybe because it didn't fit in with the theme of this issue. They're not necessarily about the comic book industry. But good stuff. So we start off with Duopoly by Nick Thorkelson. Never heard of this guy. Pretty nice, breezy, cartoony style. I kind of like it. And just talking about when you're a kid, you know, getting into superhero comics, and then pretty soon that was all you could buy. You know, when he was a kid, there was Little Lulu, there was horror comics, there was westerns, romances. But he basically talks about how, because it is a duopoly, you know, things have just kind of calcified into just superhero comics. That's what we got now. And nobody wants to rock the boat. Pretty interesting comic about just the industry. talking about how because it's a duopoly, you can't really go, there's not many other places to go, so, censorship and stuff. Good stuff. I like this one. Here we have another Michael Dougan strip, Novice in a Comic Shop. Just showing what a wasteland comics are if you're an adult. You should read the better comics, Michael Dougan. There's another article by Leonard Rifas, The Image of Arabs in U.S. Comic Books. And as you can imagine, it's not good. All Arabs were either Bedouins, terrorists or assassins, or wealthy sheiks. It's interesting. In the 70s, though, I just remember wealthy sheiks. Though, it was before the PLO was a big thing. I mean, they were there, but we weren't reporting on it that much. And basically, every time you saw an Arab, he was like this really filthy rich sheik. Just decadent, having all, swilling champagne, running through America, throwing money around. But now, as you know, unfortunately, it's a much meaner stereotype of they're all terrorists. And that started in the 80s even. So it's kind of interesting, showing off various comics, Lois Lane, even Basil Wolverton, and all their stereotypical views of Arabs. This is a nice one. This is very interesting. Busted. The Story of Tits and Clits #1 by Joyce Farmer, who was the editor. Recently, we looked at some Joyce Farmer. It's interesting that, she's in a bunch of undergrounds. She created undergrounds. She edited them back in the heyday. But I didn't like her work back then. But this is great. So, over the intervening decade and a half, she got really good. I don't think I have anything from Joyce Farmer from this era. And really like the art in this. And this is just the true story of her and her co-editor. When Tits and Clits #1 came out, it got busted. In an undercover cop went into a head shop. And basically the government tried to charge them with obscenity. They could have gone to jail if they were convicted. The head shop, it's not really a head shop, it was a bookstore. But they sold undergrounds. The bookstore owners were arrested. They had to get out on bail, use their Christmas money. And then Joyce Farmer and her partner find out about this. And the ACLU show up and they're like, you guys need our help. You could go to jail for this. And they just can't believe it. The ACLU is the whole time is shown as a knight in shining armor. So just talking about this whole trial and everything they had to do. And it's kind of interesting because for years already, guys, the reason they started Tits and Clits, these women, was because they saw this sexist, crazy, naughty stuff in the men-created undergrounds, the male-dominated underground industry, and they were like, we can be just as gross, but we'll do it in a different way. And I'm sure we can gross out men just as much without the violence. And even when they came out, it was problematic, calling it Tits and Clits. The name was kind of an albatross. Even feminists wouldn't read their comic. Even though this was a very feminist thing to do, they'd be like, I'm never going to review anything called Tits and Clits. That's just gross. Which is so sad. It's just becoming as puritanical as any right-wing Christian. And eventually the case is thrown out of court. So they're okay. But pretty interesting behind-the-scenes story. Excuse me. We have a one-pager from Mary Fleener, Sexism in Comics. Just talking about how in comics, superhero comics, everyone's this perfect ideal. All the women are drop-dead gorgeous, va-va-voom, and all the guys are just completely, buff. I like how the guy says, hey, wait a second, how come I don't have a bulge in my pants? And the woman character just says, that gets in the way of the fantasies of these young homophobic boys. That would that would queer the deal, no pun intended. This is a nice one-pager from Dennis Worden. The mongrel dog is free. And this is him extorting the virtues of being a self-published Xerox produced cartoonist. Of course, he just rags on it so much. Just talking about how shitty so many of them are, which they probably were. Just like everything, 95% of everything is not good. But he's pretty enthusiastic about it. Eventually, the initial thrill will subside, and you may begin to hear the silent echo of your artwork down the cold, empty canyons of obscurity. I remember that feeling. Putting my heart and soul into fanzines, and probably like 10 people read them, my friends, you know. Kick that habit, man. And this is Comics Insult You. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to read that. This is just a one-pager by Mark Campos. And this is kind of a weird one, how this guy's saying that he used to read, superhero comics and semi-superhero comics. And it made him think more violently. Like, if he was in the bus and he saw some shady dude, he'd be like, yeah, I wonder if I could kick his ass like the superheroes do. Just like an idle notion. And then he says when he had to stop buying comics to, he got married and had kids, he didn't have the money, that he said he got less paranoid. Kind of weird. It's almost like it's like Frederick Wortham paid for that announcement. So here we have Meanwhile, Down in the Meadow by R. Diggs, the longtime political cartoonist. Did some stuff in the undergrounds. Great style, R. Diggs. He has a great style. And this is interesting. They're turning the camera back on themselves and saying, well, what about this comic book? This political comic book you're making? How many trees had to die so you could make it? And so Leonard Rifas, the editor character here, he's basically trying to defend himself. He's like, yeah, but maybe my message will influence some people and there'll be less pollution and less, chopping down of trees. And the animals actually buy it and say, okay, I guess you seem to be on our side. So then they go bully some guy who's chopping down trees for TV guides. And I don't think he's going to have such an easy time of it. And then we have an article about the benefit comics that came out around this time for Ethiopian famine. And there was a few, Marvel and DC, they got all these artists contributed their time, and DC contributed, the printing of it, didn't take any money from it, and sent all the money to Ethiopia. So they realized this is a noble thing to do, but both of them were inherently apolitical. It was kind of a mandate, like, oh, we don't want to just like make a simple superhero story, sell a lot of copies, make as much money as we can. But this article, as it points out, is almost all famines are politically based. It's not like there's not enough food in the world for everyone. It's that a small handful control the food and sometimes use it in a militaristic fashion to withhold from their enemies. So basically their conclusion is that you got to get to those root problems. Next we have Steve Laffler with Dog Boy. And I kind of like this Dog Boy where he's going around like killing Rupert Murdoch, all the guys, the media conglomerate guys. And he's ranting about how almost every major media outlet is controlled by 29 companies. God, that's how, what a heyday that was. God, now I'm sure it's like 5. But in 1988, it was only 29 companies pretty much owned everything. And then Marvel Comics at the time had recently been bought by New World Pictures. So Dog Boy pays a visit to New World Pictures, eavesdrops over their bullshit corporate strategies, Just comes in with a flamethrower. Hey, you greedy bastards, dog boy here to save you a trip to the tanning salon. Very dumb, but very satisfying, this comic. One of my favorite Steve Lafflers. I'm not a big fan of Steve Laffler. Never liked his stuff that much. But this is a fun comic. Dopey fun. And now we have the last issue, unfortunately, number 3. It wasn't planned to be a 3-issue miniseries. They just, I guess this didn't sell. I mean, what were they thinking? Of course this is going to sell. Start off with a nice Peter Kuper cover. I think this is pretty early in Peter Kuper's career. I think he'd already started contributing to World War III Illustrated years ago, but there's a comic in here where his style looks, definitely different than this Peter Kuper, this is more recognizable. So this is the Electoral Comics issue. A kind of funny idea for the cover. This Rube Goldberg type contraption. How we vote and how our vote matters. And of course it just comes down to A and B going into this one funnel. Basically it doesn't matter. Which I don't agree with, but a lot too. Contents page. Some more reviews of political comics. Once again, they review this kind of propagandistic anti-Mike Dukakis comic put out by some kind of faction of the Republicans, but they review it. They even say the comic has been endorsed by Jerry Falwell, so it's dumb. Though the cartoonist looks pretty good. Doesn't look bad. So we start off with Larry Gonick once again, Winner Take All. This is some really nice cartooning. I love that opening panel. And there's obviously talking about, our duopoly and how we don't have, third parties never make an impact in America just because of the way the system's set up. Of course, the Founding Fathers didn't want any political parties. They just thought that whoever they wanted to win, that handful of elites would just win. But no, democracy reared its ugly head. Because a lot of things in the Constitution were actually very undemocratic. Those guys just they didn't want the rabble to be truly democratic. That's why you couldn't even vote if you didn't have, $50 in assets, or if you weren't a male white man. So it wasn't much of a democracy. It was a democracy if you were a rich white person. Oh, male. Definitely women could vote, of course. And basically, of course, this leads to two parties which are pretty damn similar. Any radical political thought will be weeded out in the process. And by radical political thought, I mean anything that stops the money just flowing into Washington, D.C. I like this image of the donkey and the elephant just eating out of a trough full of money. Who Says You Can't Beat the Machine? A True Story. And let me get the artist on this. I forgot his name. Tom Chalky. Pretty good at cartooning here. Nice art. And I never heard of him. And this is just a true story of 1985, West Philadelphia. There was a particular legislative district that was just like one of those. It was part of the machine. The state representative from that district, he'd been elected 6 times in a row. He basically spent his whole life as this representative, and he was just knew all the levers, the levers, and the ins and outs of politics. And basically his whole political ideology was just about staying in office. He didn't give a shit about anyone. But then this candidate, who was basically just a librarian, was just sick of the corruption, came out of nowhere. And, the whole political machine tries to make him get out of the race. They try to convince him. He's like, nope, I'm going to run. And just through grassroots support, getting volunteers, getting small donations from people, he wins. So kind of an inspirational comic saying that, yeah, sometimes you can beat the machine. It seems sometimes that you're just never going to win against those forces, but sometimes things work out. Here we have another R. Diggs comic. It's California Scheming. And this is all about how the insurance companies have their claws deep into the Congress of California, the government. I'm just talking about basically the legalized bribery that goes on with lobbying. Of course, in a humorous way. And I guess at this time, California had introduced some measures that were anti-corruption, like limiting the amount of donations. And so I guess that's a good thing. I'm sure that's gone now. I wouldn't be surprised if that's been overruled in the intervening decades. Little update by Rifas talking about this California scheming thing. Oh man, this is so nice. At Home with the Golden Bough by Joyce Brabner, writer, and Steven DiStefano. Man, Steven DiStefano, just such a great cartoonist. I wish this was more than one page, but this is just so good. I love his stuff. He's doesn't do much, unfortunately. I think he went to animation or something. But, you know, he started in the 80s doing that Mazin Man comic for DC, and then started doing independent stuff, more adult stuff. And his style just kept getting better and better. He was part of the Instant Piano crew, if you guys remember those anthologies. Really great stuff. And so this is just talking about how in certain cultures throughout history, when there's been drought or sometimes too much rain, these people have basically like put their gods in chains. They've put them outside so they have to sit in the sun. It's almost like they've punished their gods or saints. Statues of saints are included too. So this is basically saying, when was the last time you contacted your elected official? Like, you should put them to the fire too. Just these guys used to do it to their gods when things, when the gods weren't doing what they were supposed to do. So we should treat the government that way. Just who are the libertarians? And this is by a guy named Scott I can't read his signature, sorry. Scott Beiser. Yeah, perfunctory art, not horrible. Actually, pretty okay. And this is just, obviously, this guy's a libertarian, and he's telling the history of the Libertarian Party and also why it's a good thing. Basically, because they're very anti-war. They're very non-interventionist. And he does say that, yeah, some of them do believe in other shittier things, but that's a small percentage. Here's another Leonard Rifas page about, he's reviewing this book, Why Americans Don't Vote. And here we got young Peter Kuper. This is written by Steve Ross, or reported by, and drawn by Peter Kuper. And this is all about George Bush Sr., who was going to be president in a few months after this was published, the vision thing. And this is just all the dirt on George Bush, what a kind of a tool he was. He was very unpopular, even the Republican Party. You know how now it's just de rigueur for who's ever running for the Republican, nomination. They all get in lockstep behind him. Just like nobody criticizes Trump within the Republican Party. The few that do are just cast out and ostracized. But it's amazing how many high-level Republicans just are totally chopping on George Bush and talking about what a simp he is and just how lame he is. I can see he just totally grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. It's so weird because compared to his son, he seems so substantive and so much better. But you forget that, yeah, he was a turd. I mean, that guy was in charge of the CIA. So he was ordering people to be tortured and ordering democratically elected leaders to be assassinated and shit. So pretty interesting. Love the cartooning by Kuper. Just great little funny drawings illustrating the reporting. That's a good one. This one's not so good. Who Rules America by Seth Tabachman. And I think he's a big contributor to World War III Illustrated. Based on a text by G.W. Domhoff. And this is basically the old, talking about, it doesn't matter who wins the presidency. It's the ruling class control who's ever president. It's always been that way. The president chooses his aides from the ruling class. All of his cabinet is. But this whole, computer-generated art, this is just utter shit. Though this one is kind of a little. But for the most part, I'm like, ugh. Look at this. That's so ugly. And remember, this is a 1988 computer. This is probably made on a TRS 80, the Radio Shack computers. No matter who wins the election, the ruling class still rules. That's the moral. So this is one of the main reasons I can never get rid of this comic. This beautiful Spain Rodriguez story, Democracy in Action. And this is talking about El Salvador and Nicaragua. And it's all stuff that is common knowledge, but nobody gave a shit. This horrible shit we were doing, supporting the Contras, these right-wing terrorists in Nicaragua, who had an elected communist government, and talking about all of just how horrible the Contras were, and how the Sandinistas in Nicaragua weren't so bad. They still were autocrats who didn't allow freedom of the press and stuff, but they weren't going around raping nuns and stuff. Yeah, the Contras are just horrible, brutal. And we were supporting them. It's kind of shameful. They were monsters. So El Salvador was a totally fascist right-wing regime, so of course we love them. Even though, the opposition press, the editors they'd find them in a barrel, all chopped up. I mean, it was a true fascist government. And, but because the Nicaraguans were left-leaning commies, we tried to destroy them, even illegally. And we broke our own laws to supply the Contras. The whole Iran-Contra scandal, of course. This might be before... No, this must be after the Iran-Contra was a thing. But I think the information wasn't all there yet. Just the whole, sending arms to Iran. I'm sorry. Making deals with Iran, our greatest enemy, and then using the money to illegally buy guns for the Contras, even though Congress said not to. So it's just such a weird, horrible scandal that is forgotten. It was forgotten then. It was just a month later, everyone was like, oh, okay. Oliver North got in trouble. It's all him. But crazy stuff. So there you go, guys. Itchy Planet, number 1 through 3. I gotta admit, I was reading these last night, and I was like, these might get kicked out of the Academy. And maybe they should. They're not that great. Some definitely nice cartooning. But, I don't know how often I'm going to want to, take these off the shelf and read them again. But, I don't know. I got a soft spot for anthology comics. I do like taking these off the wall and just flipping through them and say, oh, yeah, that artist was in there. So, this definitely doesn't get my highest recommendation. If you do want to track them down, these were in quarter boxes forever. I'm sure they're still there. So it's not hard to find them. Nobody liked this comic, as you can imagine. And but I kind of liked it when I was younger, and now I realize after reading thousands more comics, I'm like, eh. At the time, it was pretty damn good. There weren't many, alternative cartoonists out there being published. But I think overall I'm going to keep it for a while. I don't know, maybe in 10 years I'll flip through it again and say, okay, no more room in the Academy. Something's got to give. But for now, they're staying. So I hope you guys enjoyed looking at them at least. And I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.